The national outcry to end racial injustice has expanded tonight, from protests in the streets to appeals to Congress. The setting was a U.S. House hearing, headlined by the younger brother of George Floyd, who died in police custody last month. Congressional correspondent Lisa Desjardins begins our coverage.
One day after burying his brother George, Philonise Floyd walked into the U.S. Capitol with a message, pleading for justice and action.
I'm tired. I'm tired of pain. Pain you feel when you watch something like that. When you watch your big brother, who you looked up to for your whole life, die begging for his mom. I'm here to ask you to make it stop.
He appeared before the House Judiciary Committee, now working on a bill aimed at police brutality and racial profiling. George Floyd's death sparked nationwide protests and conversations around policing and race. Philonise Floyd was one of 12 panelists at the hearing. Another, Angela Underwood Jacobs, is also grieving. Her brother, Patrick Underwood, was shot and killed in Oakland during protests last month while he was working as a federal officer and guarding a federal building. She, too, called out racism by some and also pointed to blind violence that must stop.
I'm wondering, where is the outrage for a fallen officer that also happens to be African American?
Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo echoed the thought that most police officers are good, but said there is urgent need for reform.
There is no denying that changes in policing must be made. We must acknowledge that law enforcement's past contains institutional racism, injustices, and brutality.
But some Republican witnesses, like Darrell Scott, regularly seen at events with President Trump, were cautious.
I agree with the fact that police reform, or better yet, police revision should be enacted. But it has to be one that is sensitive to the stress, tension, pressure, and paranoia that policing produces.
The committee will be in order. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions.
The question round, often the most heated, was largely sober and serious. Asked why his brother died, Floyd said Officer Derek Chauvin, who pressed down on George Floyd's neck, knew him.
I think it was personal because they worked at the same place. So for him to do something like that, it had to be premeditated.
Authorities have not yet indicated that Chauvin had a personal motive. Also at the hearing, Republicans pushed back at the idea of defunding the police.
If you believe that we should defund the police, will you please raise your hand? I didn't see anyone raise their hand to defund the police. I certainly didn't see any of the Republican witnesses do.
Some panelists objected to how the question was asked and said the idea of moving funding into mental health care and community programs is good. The setting itself was extraordinary, in an auditorium in the Capitol Visitor Center to allow for social distancing. This days after congressional Democrats introduced their police reform legislation. Senate Republicans are trying to outline their own plan this week, with South Carolina Senator Tim Scott leading the effort. The pressure on them is not just national. Today it was personal, from heartbroken families. Floyd pointed to how his brother died.
You don't do that to a human being. You don't even do that to an animal. His life mattered. All our lives matter. Black lives matter.
I truly hope that you take your positions, your offices so seriously that you want to go back and really work together and collaborate. Because if you can't get it right, there's no hope for the rest of us.